Some people in the comments have asked me to give them a solid reason to switch to Linux because in their eyes, there's no compelling reason to leave Windows. So today, I'm going to tell you why you should ditch Windows entirely and what my problem with Microsoft really is. For most of my life, I was a Windows user. The first computer I ever used was running Windows XP. I still remember that green start button, the iconic Bliss wallpaper, and the feeling of booting up my very first machine. Like many of you, I spent years on Windows, playing games, browsing the internet, and learning how computers work. Back then, Windows felt like mine. I could customize it, tweak it, and even break it without Microsoft interfering. I was always fascinated by operating systems. I loved experimenting, customizing, and sometimes breaking my setup just to learn how to fix it. When Windows Longhorn builds leaked, I tested them. When Vista was released, I was impressed by its new look, though I eventually went back to XP because my hardware wasn't strong enough and Vista had its fair share of issues. Then came Windows 7. It was the best OS Microsoft had ever made. If someone had told me about Linux back then, I wouldn't have cared. And I know many of you feel the same way if you grew up during the golden era of Windows 7. But that golden era ended with Windows 8. Microsoft wanted to enter the mobile and tablet market, so they removed the start menu and turned the desktop into a secondary feature. It was a disaster. After seeing that people refused to move to Windows 8, they tried to fix things with 8.1, but most users just stuck with Windows 7. Then came Windows 10, a decent OS that felt like Windows 7, but users didn't transition easily. Microsoft had to bribe people by making the upgrade free and promising that Windows 10 would be the last version of Windows. Of course, they lied. Rumors of Windows 11 started appearing, and then it became a reality. Microsoft announced that support for Windows 10 would end on October 15, 2025. On top of that, they decided to make TPM2 a requirement for Windows 11, which meant millions of perfectly capable PCs were suddenly unsupported. Even if your machine was more powerful than the cheapest device that met Windows 11's requirements, Microsoft still refused to let you upgrade. Every time you checked Windows 10 updates, it reminded you your PC doesn't support Windows 11, but now it just says your PC is outdated, buy a new one. Microsoft doesn't care about your hardware, your experience, or your investment. They just want you to buy new devices. Still need another reason to leave Windows? Let's talk about Recall. Recall is a feature that records everything you do on your PC so that later AI can remind you what you were doing. People were furious when Microsoft announced this, and in response, the company claimed, you can disable Recall. It won't be enabled by default, except on Copilot Plus PCs. Everything Recall records stays encrypted and local on your machine. But remember when I said Microsoft lies? In the October 2025 update for Windows 11, Recall became enabled by default for everyone, with no option to turn it off in settings. And if you somehow manage to disable it, File Explorer stops working properly. So now Recall isn't just a feature, it's a core part of Windows. Even if you believe their claims that Recall data stays on your device, do you really trust them? Here's the thing, most of us are just software consumers. We don't control the operating systems we use, we rely on what's available. So why are we choosing to pay a company that lies to us about its updates, enforces unnecessary hardware requirements, tracks everything we do on our PCs, and completely disregards user preferences? Even if you ignore Microsoft's behavior, we have to break their monopoly on operating systems. Their dominance is exactly why they get away with this nonsense. They lied about Windows 10 being the last version, they lied about Recall being optional, they forced strange hardware requirements for Windows 11, they are now telling you to throw away your perfectly fine PC and buy a new one. So where do we draw the line? After October 15th, you have a few choices. Upgrade to Windows 11, if your PC meets the requirements, and accept whatever Microsoft forces on you. Buy a new PC, just as Microsoft kindly suggests. Stay on Windows 10, an insecure OS with no security updates. Or switch to Linux. Of course, some people will argue, Windows is better. Linux is useless. It doesn't run my software. And I get it. If your job depends on a Windows-only program, you're stuck. But at the very least, consider moving your personal activities to Linux. At this point, switching to Linux isn't just about performance, security, or features, it's about freedom. Linux doesn't try to exploit you at every opportunity. It isn't controlled by a corporation that profits from locking you into its ecosystem. By switching to Linux, you're not just choosing an operating system, you're choosing freedom. You're choosing not to let a company dictate how you use your computer.